I got three questions to start off with. Number one, so the mission for Christ Renewed is to establish a whole new understanding of the gospel to our audience. So, what is the gospel according to you? Like, tell me the good news of Jesus Christ, and then tell me the gospel and how it's played out in your life, and some problems you see with how like the modern church talks about the gospel, how it's treated, and what you want to see like different.
Yeah, so I'd say the gospel definitely centralizes um, around like the newness of life after you place your faith in Jesus. So, in essence, the gospel is the fact that we're sinners, we suck, we do much of terrible things. Like if every evil thing that I've ever done was put on a screen right above our heads, like I would get thrown in prison, right? Or I've done an evil thing that I never thought, right? And like like we need grace, and God knew that we couldn't do enough good things to get our way to heaven, so He sent Jesus to die on a cross, and the wrath, the justice of God was placed on Jesus on that cross, and now because of that, we get to be children of God, and we get to have a relationship with God, and we get to know Him as Father. And as soon as we place our faith in Jesus, His Spirit comes and lives inside of us. And kind of going off like the what is the church's biggest issue with the gospel today. It's that the gospel ends with when you place your faith in Jesus, you go to heaven. When in reality, like everything from the old covenant, everything before Jesus leads up to Jesus. And then Jesus dies on the cross, but Jesus dying on the cross is about the implications that it has for us. It's not just Jesus dying on the cross so we get a golden ticket to go to heaven. It's Jesus dying on the cross so we get to experience a relationship with God now. Like, what kind of father doesn't want to have a relationship with their kid for like 70 years until they get into heaven? And so I think like the biggest issue is that we don't talk as much about having like a relationship with God now, and like that is really the joy of um being a believer in Jesus is getting to have a relationship with God now, and the fact that in that relationship, like we get to experience the fruit of the Spirit: peace, patience, joy, kindness, faithfulness, goodness, and just joy. And like it really, it really has changed my life personally. I was raised Catholic, but then when my parents got divorced, fell away hard. Made my whole life about trying to make people like me, because I just didn't know what purpose there was to this life that I was living. And so got involved in fights, pornography, drugs. Like we were like smoking weed, and it was just so dumb and so empty. And it was all just like really about making people like me. And and then I got introduced to the church, and I just was like, there's something like so different about these people. Like I want to know more about Jesus and like what he's all about. Um, and like since then, I've really just come to know God as my father, and especially like having like a crappy relationship with like our dad, like having like a perfect father in heaven, but I can always come to. It just it is so comforting, and knowing like truth and knowing purpose is honestly just a real
Mhm.
blessing.
Yeah, I love that emphasis on like the gospel being about a relationship with God beyond heaven. Because a verse I'm super big on talking about is when Jesus said in John 17:3, this is eternal life, that they know you, the one true God, and Jesus Christ whom you sent. And like so many Christians, they play this game of like, how far from God can I be and still go to heaven? And they get the gospel like a get out of hell free card. Like the good part of the gospel to them, the Bible talks about the land of milk and honey and stuff. Um, and like the paradise that's gonna be super good and all that. But what's so much bigger than the land of milk and honey in paradise is just knowing God. I think eternal life, it's not like a distant hope. It's something to experience right here and right now. It's not like like a far off promise and you don't get it till you're dead. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's what makes heaven good is the fact that God's there, get to be.
mm, and what's interesting is if you think of like the gospel, God was there in the flesh with Peter and John and all the disciples. Like there are people who have experienced the glory of heaven, just right before their eyes. And like it's super big to be actively seeking a relationship with them. So, you talked about how like when you came back, you wanted to seek more of him. Like, how did that play out? Like, what did you do to find God when you came back to the church?
Yeah, so kind of when I came back to the church, like, um, really in the beginning, and like I think like this is huge for Christians today. Like, because I was still caught up in trying to make people like me, like, it wasn't really about God in the beginning. And, like, I really was, like, trying to fit in with the church crowd in the beginning. And, like, so I prayed my I believe prayer in response to, like, a pastor um, on November 11th of 2020. But I really do think that a large part of it was like wanting to fit in and like feeling like I understood the gospel enough that like I knew I wanted to follow Jesus and like it wasn't really for me until Easter of 2021 when I heard a sermon on apologetics, which is like arguments for the faith, where they were talking about Peter and how like Peter knew whether or not Jesus rose from the dead. He knew whether or not he walked with Jesus, and yet Peter still died. We have not Christian documentation of this for growing the early church, and like who would die for a lie that they know is a lie. And that was kind of when I was like, okay, so like this story of like the good news of like Jesus is not just like a good sounding story, it's something that's actually true. And if this is something that's actually true, like, and like there's so much goodness in like having a relationship with God, then like I want to take this seriously, and like I want other people to be able to experience that. And that was kind of like where it all began. And like I think something that's so easy to fall into, at least for me, in Christianity, is just like making it all about other people, and like just get other people to heaven, just get other people to heaven, just get other people to heaven. That's something that I'm learning recently. Is like the goal of Christianity is not just to get other people into heaven; it's to enjoy a relationship with God for ourselves and get other people to heaven. Like there's a reason that Jesus is asked the greatest command and he says love God and then he says love others.
Mhm.
And it really needs to all come from loving God. And so like something that I've been like trying to be really intentional about recently is just like just wholeheartedly pursuing God and not just making it about other people. And like this whole concept of grace has been hitting me hard recently of like getting what we don't deserve and like the goodness of actually having a relationship with God. Um, and like it's so crazy how like we bring the gospel up until Jesus gives us the ticket to heaven. But it really is about the way we get to live.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's super big for you're planning on being a pastor later in your life, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a very important thing for you to like understand now, because a lot of times you'll see sermons preached where it's like you can tell that the person thinks like if I tell this person the genuine gospel that the only way to life is through death, we have to be crucified with Christ. Like then they're not going to hear it, so they'll maybe like try to pull back a little bit, like moderate it. Um, and it's a big emphasis on like, no, the point of heaven is not to get somebody like interested in Jesus. It's to get them to have a relationship with him. Because that keeps Jesus at the point of it and not the people to like. I think of Jonathan Edwards, "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." Like that sermon nowadays is criticized as like hellfire and brimstone, like too rough. And but back in the when it was preached, it brought an estimated 5% of the British colony's population to God. So like that sermon that did not make people feel good. There were people like passing out at during it. If you're not familiar with it, I would totally recommend trying to look for the transcription. because it's very powerful and moving. But it's not like one of those feel good sermons you'll hear on a Sunday morning that like will get people coming back in the door on Sunday, but it won't get people in their Bibles on Monday. Um, but the point of that sermon is I want you guys to get closer to God. And I think it's a much deeper, more powerful love that he didn't just, or that he showed to not just them of like, I willing to put my reputation on the line and, give a sermon that could be very ill received. Uh, just because I want you to be with God. But he didn't just show love to the people who seem to, he also showed love to God. And like, I'm willing to risk, my like reputation as a preacher because now like that sermon definitely hinders his reputation as a preacher with modern Christians looking back to it. Um, because I want your, kingdom to expand. I want more people in your kingdom. And it's like a big emphasis on God. I think that's a, very, very good tree you found. So do you have any plans for how you're gonna get involved preaching like soon?
Yeah, so currently I'm on a a ministry team at Liberty University called Youth Quest, where we travel around to churches and we travel around to their youth groups and we host retreats for them. And I'm on the teaching team, so we're going to 7 weekends next semester, and we're teaching through two different series, one on Hebrews and one on the Book of Jonah. And so recently I've spoken on this past 2 weekends ago, I had the privilege of speaking on Hebrews 5 and Hebrews 12. Hebrews 5 talking about Jesus as our high priest and how Jesus is different. He's from the priestly order of Melchizedek, instead of the priestly order of Aaron. If you read in Hebrews 5, it's super interesting. It's basically all about how Jesus is our eternal priest and he's our eternal king, and he's the king of righteousness and the king of peace. Um, and how like he brought um, and it's super cool to dive into that text. And if you look into Melchizedek, it's super interesting. Um, Melchizedek or Abram gives Melchizedek bread, and he gives Melchizedek wine. And then right after, Abram enters into a covenantal relationship with God, almost like foreshadowing today how like because of communion, because of the bread and the wine, we are called to enter into a deeper relationship with God. So it's super cool, like unpacking that and like studying that and like finding that it's in Genesis 14. Super cool story. And then in Hebrews 12, talking about how because we're surrounded by such a large crowd of witnesses, like putting aside our sins and our hindrances and like running after God and running with our eyes on Jesus. And it's super interesting to think about the concept of like hindrances and sins and how like things can be hindrances to our walk with Jesus that aren't necessarily sins. And like we don't even want to have hindrances. Like as I was reflecting and preparing for that sermon, I was like, are there any prominent sins in my life? I was like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, let me think about the concept of hindrances. And as soon as I thought of the concept of hindrances, there's one thing that came to mind, and I had to have some hard conversations in response to that. Um, but honestly, it has definitely helped me to just be running full heartedly with my eyes on Jesus after that. And like the whole concept of like running after Jesus and not just walking after him, and how like we need to get competitive about running after Jesus. Like a story that um I use in that is how like I was playing pickleball with a couple people one day, and like my teammate was getting super passionate and like super excited, and taking it super seriously, and like she hit it out of bounds. She got super frustrated, and then like someone on the sidelines was like, "How come like you're so much more passionate about pickleball than you are about Jesus?" And I just think that was like a really interesting story. Of the fact that like we're so much like it's so much easier for us to be like passionate about like sports and things like that than about God. And we really need to be passionate and like get almost like competitive, like and excited about running after Jesus.
Yeah. I like how you're like like you don't even want hindrances, because Jesus said like those who are not with me are against me. So it's sort of the principle of like you're either all in or you're all out. There's no in between,
Mm.
and like that sort of principle, it's generally talked about on like Easter morning to try to get people to come back and stuff. But I think that principle applies to everything. Everything is either glorifying God or it's not. Um, and like there's a way to do everything that is going to be glorifying God. So I think it's super big to try to make everything spotless and like make everything about God. Um, I find that I love how that person on the sideline was just like was just straight up calling them out.
Yeah, as soon as
Yeah,
it happened, I was like, I don't know if that was the best way to say it. Not very loving, but it was a word that needed to be spoken.
yeah.
And I think I think there was probably a more loving and kind way to say it, but it was
Was
really
it
good
effective? Like,
that it
did the
happened.
person that is said it to, did she seem like convicted or offended?
Um, Honestly, she seemed more offended
Hmm.
than convicted. Um, and I don't think it really made that big of a difference. I could be wrong though. But recently, like I've seen her, like she's like speaking at like the children's church, this Sunday. So it's like I have no idea if that has anything to do with it or not. But it's cool to see like her taking her faith a bit more seriously.
Yeah, I think something that a moment like that could do is it's not going to be really effective at like changing what they think, but how they think. Like instead of like
Mm,
if they take that into their head of like, okay, that was overly like rude, she shouldn't have said it like that, then what they still got in was that you should be more competitive through your relationship with God than with pickleball. So
yeah.
like even though it didn't change what they think, like she's not
Mm,
thinking I need to seek God more because of what she
yeah.
said. She might be like it might have sunk in that like Jesus over pickleball.
Yeah. And I think because it is like a message for like youth, I think it is like super like strong and impactful because it is really easy for youth to take sports more seriously than they
Yeah.
take Jesus. Like even like personally, like during wrestling season, and then not that I wasn't still pursuing God, but I just wasn't pursuing God as passionately as I was outside of wrestling season,
Yeah, but
just
you
because
were
it
good at
takes up
wrestling,
so
right?
much time and so much commitment. Yeah, I did pretty good.
Hmm.
I took eighth in the state 1 year, but it's definitely like, and I mean, I think like even outside of wrestling, it is a balance of like figuring out like how like despite all the commitments and the things that we have going on in life, to like still like chase
Hmm.
after and pursue God above all the other things, and like not putting a job above God. Like even in ministry, like going into like church work, like we need to put God above um what we're doing. Like we should be more excited about spending time with God than we should be about preaching or like anything like anything like else ministry wise. Like above all else, like our the thing that we are the most excited about should be spending time with God.
Yeah, I'm super big on like making everything like actively glorifying God, so your mind is never taken off of him. Because he's worthy of every moment of our life. He gives us every moment of his life. In fact, he gave us his entire life when he died on the cross. But like even now, like he's sitting here in this conversation, he's listening to us speak. So I think that he deserves everything we have. So I'm a big fan of like when the disciples came to Jesus, they dropped everything. Um, no matter how much. So anything that's not actively glorifying God, you gotta just cut it out. Like Peter, when he came to Christ, the like there I'm sure most of you guys already know this story. Um but basically Jesus gave him to prove to Jesus or to prove to Peter that he was the Messiah. He said, cast your net into the lake, and then when he pulled it up, he pulled up so many fish that his boat started to sink. Now that's hundreds of thousands of dollars of fish. He literally like essentially won the lottery. And it's written that he left everything and followed Jesus. So like he literally gave up a winning lottery ticket to follow Jesus. And I think that that's something we have to ask ourselves if he's like is that something I would do? Because a lot of times you might be like, well, why hasn't God given me this thing I've kept on asking for? And it's like what when Jesus did give it to Peter, when Jesus is handing it out, it's because of the way that they're going to listen to it and take it in. Like he's going to use that to glorify God, use that as testimony of like, you be like me and give up everything to follow Jesus. For me, I was sitting in like math class my junior year, just like, what the frick am I doing? Like doing algebra 2. So I asked my guidance counselor, I want to graduate a year early. Um, so that I can be spending that time glorifying God. And that's not to say that like everyone has to graduate a year early if you're in high school because otherwise you're sinning. Like you can totally glorify God in your high school. It's often a place that people utilize a lot because there's so many people to reach out to. However, I was not in a position of like reaching out a lot to a lot of people in my school. Like I did not feel at that time wasn't glorifying God for me, so I cut it out. Um, you can all, but there that does also bring up the fact that you can turn stuff rather than cutting them out. You can like change it and glorify God. I think is
You've
it
been,
C.J. Stroud, the Texans quarterback? He said,
yeah.
yeah, he's got drafted in the NFL. And he said, my job isn't football. My job is preaching the gospel. Football.
So you ran a club in high school, Christian club at school, and I'm just curious, like, how do you glorify God in your time in school with like math class and like the Christian club and like graduating year?
Yeah, so the year I decided I was gonna graduate early, this guy actually ran the club. And like I think that it was good, but it was like it was rather than something like standing on its own to help people grow in faith. It was more of a like additive thing to church. Like I remember the first day you gave like a slideshow of like here's some churches you can get connected to, which I think is really good. The problem is that no one went. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try to make this like a standalone thing. So I started preaching every week. Like I would give a sermon instead of like playing like videos made by like Francis Chan and stuff. Because I think a lot of the videos that were played too, they were more aimed towards Christians. But most of the people at the club, they weren't. They believed that God is real, but they didn't believe in God. Like if you ask them, did you rise from the dead? They'd say yes. But if you ask them, like, if you were dying, would you be willing to stand by your God and say, I trust that he makes the right choice? They would say, no. So, uh, and when so like, one thing that was also really good was I brought in a lot of guest speakers from other schools. Cause basically my YouTube was the freaking best. Like, it's absolutely stacked with like great leadership material. So I would be like, hey, do you want to come in on this date and preach to the sermon? Um, and they'd be like, sure. And then that would bring in a lot of new kids because I would hype it up as like a big special event. Like, ooh, guest speaker. Ah. Um, and I think I would definitely recommend that to anyone who's in school and they're like, I don't feel like God's being glorified by this. I feel like I'm just wasting my time. But I also, it still felt like what I was doing was good, but it felt like I could be doing more if, instead of like I was, like I would have to prepare a sermon while juggling creation. I think I could give a better sermon if instead of studying for algebra the year or the night before, I was instead like writing articles on the ChristRenewed website, which I would totally recommend any guys check out. Only got that on. But so when you were in school, do you feel like it was like a really good place to like glorify God?
Yeah, I don't know the exact statistic, but I do know that most people who come to faith uh, hear the gospel before they turn 18. So I was super passionate and honestly loved being in high school because I really wanted to make the most of these opportunities. Um, like I remember every day I'd play spike ball with my friends and like just like trying to like do the little things of just like embodying Christ and everything. And like one day towards the end of the year, I had the privilege of like one of the kids who we played spike ball with all semester, like at literally the last day of school, asked me about Jesus, and I had the privilege of like sharing the gospel with him, and like I remember I sent him a sermon from our church um that day, and then like a couple days later, like he told me that like he put his faith in Jesus, and I was like, dude, like this is so cool because I think high school is a pivotal time where people are discerning what they are going to live for, and people are searching for truth and they're searching for purpose. And in this world that says there is no truth and there is no purpose, like people are searching for something. And so getting to show them that truth and purpose can be found and is found in Jesus Christ um, is like a true joy. Yeah, it's a joy. It's powerful, um, and it was really cool because I know that like a lot of like I didn't see a lot of people come to faith, but I really do believe and I'm trusting God that sees and plan. And like I have a friend, and she told me that like the first time she heard the gospel, she was like 7 years old. She just heard it from friends, and like she's like me hearing it at such a young age led to me being more open to it at like a later age, and like she's the only one in her family to see. So I really am big on taking advantage of the opportunity, pouring into.
I think that youth are so much more open to the Bible because the whole big idea of the gospel is like less of me, more
Yeah,
like John the Baptist said. I think the gospel is embodied in what he said. He must become greater. I must become less. Like it's not just about making God big. In order to make God big, you have to become less in your heart. And like a lot of adults like financially independent, salary, like do all these things for ourselves, and then even take care of other people, like kids. It's really easy to think like to get into headspace of like, oh wow, look at how competent I am and in control.
yeah,
Like that's an idea that kids do not have. They are already used to having like a set of rules that they must follow no matter what, because everyone's putting them over them. Like but when you're an adult, like for the most part, the only rules that you have to follow set by someone else are the government. And in America, the government's set up in a way to try to give them that.
yeah, and it's super interesting. There's a passage of scripture that I really love where Jesus talks about how we need to enter the kingdom of God with a child, and just like the emphasis on Father and like knowing God as Father, like as like a little child who's like desperate and like longing and like I almost think of like a little kid like just can't like spend enough time with their parent, and they just want to spend time with them all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time, and how like they're dependent on them, and like that's like the kind of mindset that like we're called to have, like a dependence on God, where like we just want to spend time with him, spend time with him, spend time with him.
Yeah. Um, I want to thank everyone for watching. I think this has been great. Go to wholenewgospel.org to get a whole new understanding of the gospel. I told that URL to my friend one time. He's like, what? It's not actually a new gospel, just like a new understanding. Um, and come back next time. God bless you all.